Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of the Feudal Future podcast. I'm Marshall Toplansky.
I'm Joel Kotkin.
And today we are delighted to have with us both Andrew Dye, who is Vice President of Strategy for JobsOhio, and Bill Carpou, who is CEO of Octane, the Orange County-based technology incubator, as well as the group that's trying to develop a broader economic and innovation base in Orange County. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks, Marshall, for having us.
Andrew, well, today we want to talk about innovation and how innovation happens. Joel, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I saw Andrew in Ohio a few weeks ago. He was hiding the ball, not telling me what was happening. He just said something big was going to happen, and something very big did happen, which is obviously the Intel announcement, as I understand it, 20 billion and could go to 100 billion over time. So the question is this part of an expanding landscape for tech development, and or is this just a one-off case, or is this the beginning of something?
Joel, well, thanks again for the invitation to participate. JobsOhio, we're about 10 years old. We're a private nonprofit that does the economic development work in Ohio. And so we've been at this for a decade in terms of trying to attract more investment to the state. And so, the Intel investment is the largest sort of in our history, over $20 billion. The state is making a significant investment in infrastructure. JobsOhio is providing certain incentives alongside the state. But it'll be the first semiconductor fab in the Midwest, and so we're very proud that will happen just outside Columbus. Columbus has had momentum for a while. Some people see it as the Austin of the North. It's a capital city with a lot of growth and young population. But to have a semiconductor fab in Ohio is a big achievement. And obviously the work after the ribbon cutting is happening now in terms of the construction, planning, and the permitting. But, I think it's an exciting new chapter in Ohio's innovation history.
Marshall, you...
Yeah, I mean, by the way, congratulations and kudos. When you get a $20 billion investment in anything, you can't underestimate how much work it took to get that. So great job. But the question I have for both of you is kind of what Joel was alluding to, and that is that why wasn't this in California?
Yeah, after all, we did invent the semiconductor, and Intel is based in the Bay Area.
Well, and Bill, here in Orange County,
right,
we have a very strong history of semiconductor manufacturing. Why is it that an Intel went to Ohio and didn't go to California? Bill, start us off on that, and then Andrew, I want to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, Andrew, so congratulations on that. And I'm not even aware that we competed for that. So, which is even more alarming, I guess, to some sense, because as you said, Southern California, and specifically Orange County, has a strong semiconductor industry. Really, that's resurging. So why that happen? Not having spoken to Intel, I'm not exactly sure, but I could tell you that when we see companies that are moving outside of the area, a portion of it is regulation driven. Some of it is the ownership and from a tax perspective. But we're not seeing anywhere near the number of companies moving out than we did maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, from that perspective. So I think companies are also looking to diversify where their talent comes from. So it's interesting, Andrew. You say Columbus, obviously, there's a pretty big university there, and a lot of talent that could come from that as an epicenter. So what we're seeing is the development of other innovation centers, and I think that's a great thing. I think that's a great thing for us as a country. To not have everything sitting in Silicon Valley. And, over the last couple of years, we've seen more and more develop in Boston and Denver and Salt Lake and Arizona. And, we we tend to work collaboratively with those particular areas. So
you think diversification is good? I mean, which is kind of a sound business strategy, right? And it would seem like a sound strategic strategy for the for the country to kind of let's not put it all in Silicon Valley.
I do, and I think I think obviously I think it's good when it diversifies into Southern California and Orange County. But we can't absorb all of it, and we see a fair amount of companies that are moving from Northern California, and the reasons that they're doing that is actually some of the reasons that people are saying that they're moving out of Southern California, which would be housing expense and things like that. And I got to tell you, just having located at least part-time to Denver, there's very little difference between the cost of living in Denver and in Southern California. Very little,
other than housing.
Housing still quite a bit.
Was housing less expensive, or did you find it to be the same?
I found it to be exhausting in terms of chasing the market, having to pay over ask and multiple offers on everything. So on a square footage basis, I put it on par with other areas of Southern California.
Well, and now, what a perfect lead into Andrew. I presume that one of the big benefits for Intel of relocating or locating that fab in the Columbus area is the relatively low cost of housing for the thousands of people that are going to be working there.
Yeah, and these site selection decisions are, part of it is sort of formulaic in terms of how they weight the criteria, and then another part is very subjective, how they feel when they're in the market. And we're hosting companies all the time, and we expect more big investments in the Midwest. I had the pleasure of getting to know Joel about a year ago in the context of a study he did around reshoring, and we had a hypothesis that this could be a big opportunity for the U.S., and it's starting to come to fruition. But we're trying to drive that innovation strategy, Marshall, all across the state. So, at JobsOhio, we have this 3-part innovation strategy. We're funding innovation districts in Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Columbus. We have a growth capital program, which provides kind of money to earlier stage companies. And then we also have an R&D center program. So if a company wants to open up a new R&D center, we can support them. So those kind of 3 pieces working together, we're trying to push the state forward because, as many of you know, we had more than our fair share of manufacturing. We still are a very significant, the 3rd largest U.S. manufacturing state, but we're trying to build diversification around that through our innovation strategy.
Yeah, and these are what you're talking about are formal programs that the state has, right?
Through JobsOhio, yeah. And again, we're a private entity that works outside, but alongside the state government. And so, we're in very close touch with the General Assembly and making sure that we're, getting all 88 counties covered. But we have some discretion to set a strategy and keep it.
So it sounds very intentional. Bill, what's it like in California?
Yeah, I was about to ask the same question.
Yeah, I was, I'm going to answer that, but let me just ask Andrew. So the state is basically funding you then for this, for these innovation clusters or so? Do I understand that correctly?
So our funding is a whole other story, but I'll give a synopsis. But basically, we are funded through a 25-year privatization of the state liquor enterprise. So that was put in place in 2013, and it goes to 2038. And the profits from that are our funds for grants, loans, innovation programs. And I formerly was in kind of in finance, and we have 10 sector teams. So we have someone from the tech industry, someone from the healthcare industry. So when we're thinking about making a grant or a loan, we have like a investor mindset of what kind of tax revenue is this going to produce to the state. So it's kind of a virtuous circle of we have the funding, and then we put that funding into deals that produce more tax revenue.
Yeah. So, I mean, Marshall, to go back to your question, there's very little support that really comes from the state. So, we are an SBDC. There is a small match that comes from the state, in terms of creating companies through our accelerator. But if I were to look at it in terms of the overall budget, it's probably 5.5%, 6%. So it's a relatively small number. And to add to that, one of the other challenges, and I know other organizations that are that are comparable to what Octane's doing believe the same thing, is that there should be more state engagement and involvement. And I'm sure there's money there. It's just not flowing south, first of all. And that flows on not a meritocracy, but it flows on just, well, if there's 10 organizations, let's take an amount and divide it by 10, regardless of what the performance, the output, and the impact is. I think the other thing that we see locally is, unfortunately, Orange County is made up of what, 27 different cities. And, we don't have the support of a downtown LA or LA City or San Diego City. So, I think that's an area. And when I hear yourself, Andrew, I look at this and say, my God, there's a way that I should be in Sacramento talking to somebody. I'd love to talk to our governor as to what we could do for job creation, at a very reasonable rate.
Well, and I'm hearing kind of a regionalization, which is what Andrew is implying, right? That, look, Ohio has a bunch of disparate municipalities also, right? I mean, the fab is actually not going into the city of Columbus, right? It's going into a suburban thing that is county kind of driven. I mean, what was it that you did in Ohio that enabled this kind of regional view between Columbus, Cincinnati, Cleveland, that we're not doing here?
So one of the things I've heard in economic development is that all deals are local. And I think this Intel announcement did benefit from very strong local officials. The state was critical, particularly, during the beginning, as we had to submit sites that, were 1,000-acre type parcels to get in the game. And then, there's a strong regional group in Columbus where all the CEOs are united in trying to push the competitiveness of the region. And, credit to Governor DeWine and Lieutenant Governor Husted, who set the tone at the top about why Ohio could be a supportive partner to Intel. So all of this is still playing out, but I think, the local partner deserves a lot of credit. But there's credit to be had at all levels in terms of, being ready to welcome this type of investment to the state.
I was wondering a little bit, Bill, this will be directed first at you anyway, which is maybe it's a question of, sometimes the first one will later be last. And in a way, California has been so successful for so long that we don't think we have to compete with Ohio. We don't think we have to encourage job creation. It's going to happen on its own. We have these amazing conversations with people when we show them the numbers that we have in our report. And they just say, oh, well, it always will come back. We don't have to change anything. Bill, do we have something that we maybe can learn from Ohio, which certainly suffered tremendously for many, many years during the deindustrialization? Is there something we can learn?
Well, I think we could learn from Ohio is really what that process was and what the public-private partnership looked like. That's what I think is important. When we were looking, Amazon, what was that, Joel?
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Marshall and I worked on Kansas City's application actually.
but I mean, that was that should have opened up our eyes as to what we could have done differently, in terms of attracting an organization like that. What I heard is we never really came with a good bid, but it was, it just wasn't structured seamlessly. I mean, so it's not just Ohio. I think I look at the things that are going on in Detroit that I mentioned earlier before we got on this call, and what's going on here in Denver and all of that. So I think there's a lot for us to learn. And I think it's got to do with public-private partnerships that just don't exist to the extent that they should in the state of California. So organizations like ours are left to kind of try and do this themselves. strong corporate support. But there's an inflection line between those companies that are committed to the Bay Area versus Southern California.
Andrew, what do you hear from companies that are coming in, comparing Ohio and California as environments for them to move into?
So I think
And you're not going to hurt my feelings, Andrew. So
some companies
Denver
focus
anyway.
some companies focus on the cost differentials, and those numbers are real and meaningful. The cost of living differentials, the cost operating differentials. I also think there's a proximity to customers argument to this. If you're a defense contractor, being close to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton is a big advantage. And then the talent piece is probably the most important of them all. One California-based business called Upstart, they opened a second headquarters in Columbus. I think they're now growing towards 1,000 people, but again, close to a major state university. Great data science talent. There are other examples like that. Vantage Robotics is a project we just announced. They're a U.S. drone company based in San Leandro. They're looking at expanding in Ohio. So I think it's for a while there it was kind of California to Texas. There was a lot of activity. I'm not sure it's a either or. It's a both and. For a lot of these companies, they're having a big second outpost in Ohio.
Yeah, you were talking about access to talent and access to universities. One of the things that we're finding in our research is that there is a very tight correlation between both taxes and regulatory environment and innovation. And, we at Chapman, we created something called the Chapman University Innovation Index, which looks at the change in jobs in innovation-oriented industries, jobs, number of businesses, and wages. And the number one piece of data that correlates with that is state and local taxes. And under the next thing that correlates is regulatory environment. And so one of the questions we have, and we hear this a lot from business guys, is attitude. That there is something kind of qualitative about the nature of the relationship between the state, local government, and businesses that is very synergistic, very welcoming, very helpful in places like Ohio and Utah and Colorado, and very contentious and adversarial in places like California. Is that ring true to you? Does that sound like there may be some validity there?
Bill, I welcome your standpoint. I think in Ohio, the state agencies do pride themselves on being business oriented. Obviously, there are real processes that need to be adhered to, but if you're the Ohio EPA or the Ohio Department of Transportation, I mean, you're going to be critical to the success of this Intel project in terms of permitting and road work. So they're at the table from the beginning. And again, the State House, they have done a ton to make the state more competitive from a tax and regulatory standpoint. They passed a bill to help us compete on incentives better on these big deals, and they brought the top tax rate down. So, Bill, without going to all those details, I guess, what are you seeing at Octane?
Well, I mean, when you look at the state of California, I mean, there's a variety of components that Marshall just hit on. I mean, the regulations are a bit more dramatic than other areas of the country. So it's not that easy, and you do somewhat lose control of some of the regulatory components. There's no question the state tax aspect is as high as it is anywhere in the country, and projected actually go higher at this point. At the same time, there's a quality of life aspect. And I remember when I was moving here, the realtors were saying, "Hey, you know what? It's California, and don't worry about it. You're going to be outside all the time." So I know successful people that run successful businesses that could easily move to Texas and pay no personal tax and they're not willing to do it. So, there's that aspect. There's the aspect that puts us close to the APEC markets and everything. So, we seem to be a good jumping off point for that. And even as you look at companies that are coming into the US from Europe, from the UK, traditionally they looked at Boston, and now we're seeing quite a bit of them set up shop in Southern California. And it's amazing when they look at it. It's much less expensive than Northern California. It's much less expensive. It's less expensive than Boston. So, I understand all the pragmatic reasons as to why somebody would want to move, regulation and taxes, but there are personal reasons that people choose to stay here and will always stay here. And I think, Marshall or Joel, you may have mentioned it, that's a little bit of the attitude that the state kind of has is, hey, this is a great place to live. It's a great place to raise a family. And people are going to want to stay here, and they'll pay a premium to do that.
Although it does seem a little bit strange given what's happening with the homeless and the crime and the public schools having still have one child in the public schools here. So, I think that argument is harder to make. The weather's still great, and we won't. What temperature is it in Ohio right now, Andrew?
I was going to say our CEO JP Natsif, he sells the attributes of Ohio hard, but he has joked in the past that we have everything except dry heat and beaches. So those are not checks we can make in here. But yeah, no, we're expecting a pretty good bit of ice and snow tomorrow.
So, but maybe here's a sort of positive thing that we can really focus on, which is maybe there's going to be a division of labor that, when I think of an Intel plant, they stopped building in California, what must be 20 years ago, 30 years ago, because of the regulation and other issues around it. Will we maybe see a thing where a certain kind of company goes to Orange County or Silicon Valley and another kind of company goes to Ohio? Because let's say if I'm going to build a factory or I'm going to build a semiconductor plant, maybe Ohio makes much more sense. But maybe if I'm a company that's tied to Asia Pacific or is dependent on the extremely high, let's say Caltech, UCI kind of resources. So, maybe I have a different decision. So is there some synergy that maybe as a country we can develop between California and the Midwest and Texas to make the country more competitive?
I think you will, Joel, and that's a reason that I think the diversity of regions is actually a good idea. If you look at Southern California, if you look at Orange County, if you're starting an ophthalmology company or an ophthalmology business, this is where you should be. The last thing you should be thinking about is regulation and taxes at that point, because this is the epicenter of that type of innovation. You've got the greatest exposure to capital through the fund that we're a general partner in, or any other number of funds, as well as the industry, the experts, the individuals that could help you build your business. So I kind of see areas having industry focus, and that will retain companies, and it will attract companies. And I used ophthalmology as one example. There's a couple of others, but we see I haven't seen any that have actually moved out of here in the last 3 years.
Well, and to be looking at the numbers on that, we are between 5 and 8 times the density of businesses in the medical device business, the ophthalmology business,
right,
ophthalmological devices of any place in the country here in Orange County. So that is definitely a core strength that we have. So Joel's argument is that maybe we'll start looking at where the strengths are, and everybody kind of builds around what the strengths are that they have today. Although the question I was going to ask both of you is, I get the sense, and I don't know, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, that we're kind of in the middle of a sea change, that the whole COVID supply chain crisis has created a new urgency toward reshoring businesses, in which case we're going to see a lot of manufacturing businesses or quasi-manufacturing businesses come back to the United States. A, are you guys seeing that in your regions? And B, what kind of logic does somebody who's, taking a business from India and thinking about moving it back here, or from China and thinking about moving it back here, go through?
Well, I'm not necessarily seeing that significantly. I'm hearing it, but I can't point to a specific example. But where I'm hearing it, none of those companies are looking to bring back offshore manufacturing and put it in California. They're looking to put it someplace where, and so that could be the sea change that you're talking about, Marshall. And
well, are you seeing this? What about from you, Andrew? Are you seeing a lot of inquiries from offshore locations to relocate into the Midwest?
A year ago, everyone was scenario planning, and with that, I think they were putting a risk management lens. Sole source reliance on 8,000 miles away sites wasn't clearing risk management anymore. So, is it in the U.S.? Is it in Mexico? Is it somewhere else? So I think a year ago, there was a lot of scenario planning, and now I think you're seeing some real investment activity. There have been some other onshoring type deals. Near Toledo, Peloton has committed to making an investment. First Solar on the energy side is done 3 huge investments near Toledo, again, just south of Detroit. And so when you think about clean energy trends that Californians focus on a lot of those panels now will come from Ohio. So I think we are seeing a lot of positive signals. Is it an overwhelming trend yet? Probably not. But I would say, just for your audience, as critical as manufacturing is, and it is a huge contributor to Ohio GDP, and it's about 1 out of every 8 jobs, I think 12.5%. We're also competing heavily in the services type industry with these innovation districts and healthcare and IT. So I think we're just trying to, Marshall, build a more resilient economy. I think many states figured out the downside of putting too many eggs in one basket over the past few decades, and now trying to have a more resilient economy that, to Joel's points about the middle class, support more strong middle class families and jobs.
Do you think that in any way that Intel, we talk about the Intel investment, that some of that is because we're seeing, for instance, if the interrelationship between high tech and traditional manufacturing, in that I was reading the other day that there's a 5-day supply of chips left for the auto industry. Is part of the Intel gambit is to say, now that these products are incorporated into virtually every manufactured product, that being in the Midwest where a lot of that manufacturing was that part of the logic for moving to Ohio?
We won't speak for them. I think all these they're investing ahead of customer demand, and I think based on the digitization of large parts of our economy, we're going to be extremely supportive of making them successful here. And so, I think we're still in the early chapter. The initial announcement was January 21st. Hopefully construction will start in the second half of this year. Joel, I think we could see other big announcements that, there are more companies out there looking, not just in semiconductors, but in, the battery supply chain. And I think it gets down to open, secure supply chains. Are the supply chains open, and are they secure? And I think a lot of different states have different value propositions, but we're trying to speak loudly with ours, and so far we've had some initial success.
So Bill, is this a discussion that affects you here in Orange County?
Can I just ask Andrew a question? Do you mind?
Yeah, sure.
Sure, please.
Who were the second? Who was number 2 or number 3 behind Ohio? Do you know what other areas or regions?
You mean from an Intel selection perspective?
Yeah, I'd be curious who that was.
I don't think that's disclosed. These projects are highly competitive.
Yeah.
So I think we might have an internal view, but it hasn't been disclosed yet.
Who do you consider to be your biggest competitors?
So we kind of look at competition with, the states that are immediately around us, our regional competitors, and then our national competitors, the Texases, North Carolinas, the Floridas that have had, really rapid population growth and they have low taxes. So I think, Bill highlighted a number of reasons why California, does generate a lot of wins, despite maybe some of the regulatory and environmental challenges, but certainly the proximity to Asia, the ports, despite all the challenges, there are a lot of assets. It's a matter of, I don't know how to say getting out of your own way, but we have complementary strengths. Maybe that is a nicer way to put it.
Well, let me flip it back on Bill. So, Bill, who do you worry about from a competitive perspective when it comes to Orange County?
Well, I think now I'm going to worry about Ohio, after talking to Andrew here. But I think we've seen a bit of a drain to the Dallas, Austin area, Salt Lake. Haven't really seen it. Denver's been more developed in Denver, versus people bailing out to go to Denver. But and to a lesser extent maybe Phoenix. So those are still kind of in the West and everything. So people aren't expanding their footprint tremendously, but that's more of an ecosystem that provides some of the same things that we do. An accelerator, the funding for it, the closeness and proximity to universities, the creation of jobs. I'm aware of companies and in semiconductors, one or two I sit on the boards that are looking to expand manufacturing outside of Southern California. And
where are they going?
For obvious reasons. One was North Carolina. That was one area, and I think the other, if I recall correctly, is in the Indy area, Indianapolis.
So in the perfect world, or not even the perfect world, the kind of the world that you're living in now, it sounds to me like you don't have any expectation that a manufacturing business is going to expand itself in Orange County or in California. That it's very likely, if it needs more manufacturing capacity, that it's going to be outside of the state. Is that right, Bill?
Yeah, I'd say so, Marshall. But I want to temper that a little bit, because if you look at Edwards Life Science, they're completely the opposite of that. Is they are expanding and they are doing manufacturing, but that doesn't mean that they don't have footprints elsewhere in the world, which they do. So I think consciously most companies that are manufacturing are looking at less expensive manufacturing areas. And to the point that was made before, they're not necessarily looking at offshoring right now. They're looking at areas of the Midwest that have a talent pool that could and the real estate to be able to create and build a manufacturing center.
Well, and Andrew, on your side of it, it sounds to me that just simply getting manufacturing and companies to commit to new manufacturing space in Ohio is not really enough for you, that you're looking at much more of a diversification and being able to bring in the services side as well as the manufacturing side. Is that right?
Yeah, and about half, just over half of the projects we work on are manufacturing. And another big one recently was Amgen, making a big investment near Columbus, close to where Intel's going. So those are the ones that they get a lot of the headlines. But as Joel, as you know, given productivity, given automation, given foreign competition, there's a lot of secular quote unquote pressure down on manufacturing jobs. So you have to kind of keep winning deals to keep your employment level either flat or slightly growing. But some of these services sectors are just a rocket ship. Like the Cleveland Clinic was probably 10, 20,000 employees a couple decades ago. Now it's like 50,000. So our innovation district in Cleveland is our anchor institution is the Cleveland Clinic. Yeah. Same goes with Cincinnati Children's Hospital and the University of Cincinnati. So yeah, it's a diversification play, Marshall. And that takes time and patience, but with the limited resources we have, we're trying to make smart bets to, if a company's looking at the Midwest and they're triangulating between Michigan and North Carolina and Ohio, we want to tip the balance.
Well, you must be doing something right. I want to kind of sum up with this statistic and get your impression on it. So, a group of people at the Hoover Institution in Northern California at Stanford, led by Joe Vranich, who was actually, interestingly, a former Orange County guy, tracked the number of capital projects by state over the past 2 years. And we took his numbers and we said, okay, how does this map out on a per capita basis, right? Because obviously the whole idea here is build opportunity for your population. So let's look at the number of capital projects cited per capita in the states. Turns out that Ohio was number one, 14 times higher per capita rate of capital projects, right? These are the big ones that we've all been talking about, 14 times higher than the state of California. What do you think? Why? At the end of the day, that is a huge difference. If you had to kind of if you had to go to Governor Newsom and say, hey, here's the 3 things that you should do to look at, and that might be explaining this difference, what would you do? What would you say?
Well,
go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I guess Ohio's story it's not just this recent news. It's a 10+ year story. I mean, in the early 2000s, NCR left. In the 90s, the Browns left. There were a number of companies like leaving, and so the turnaround of Ohio, it's taken the past decade a combination of legislative moves and economic development moves like JobsOhio to build the momentum. And so I think our CEO talks about a generational opportunity coming out of COVID. We've had this 24-month national trauma. How do we seize the generational opportunity to win? And so, Bill, I'll leave it to you to give Governor Newsom advice.
I'd welcome that opportunity. And if Governor Newsom ever sees this, let's chat. I mean, I don't know that the number completely surprises me, Marshall. I mean, because intentionally, again, you see companies that are moving manufacturing out where the big capital improvements are. I see the evolution, and where we position ourselves as an organization is the front end creation of a company, and the research and development, and the engineering, and the product development is so far later in the back end that's what's tending to move from this location. And it doesn't mean the company moves, but it means that they take a footprint someplace else. And is that good for California long term? Probably not, but is it livable? I believe it is. And I think the governor probably thinks that also.
Well, basically, I mean, this has been very, very interesting. But I do think that at the end of the day, the positive spin that we want to come out with is, and this is whenever I compare us with other countries, particularly in Europe, is that we can do it all because of the size and the diversity of this country. That, you can, if you can't build something here because we don't have enough water, I think Ohio has a lot of water. If you can't, if young people can't afford to live in California, there are other places for them to live. So what I see in both of your efforts is something very positive for this country, and a common belief that we're going to have to do these things within the continental borders of the United States. I think that's the biggest lesson coming out of the COVID situation, when we couldn't even get masks and we couldn't do the most basic things. And I think that what you're doing in Orange County and in Denver, and what Andrew is doing in Ohio, is part of an American resurgence that, despite the inadequacies of the leadership that we've had in Washington for the last long period of time, I think the country itself has the capacity to come back, and you two are playing an important role in developing a synergistic approach that can bring the U.S. back to where it needs to be.
Joel, I think that's great. That's a great point to summarize on. And at the end of the day, we want the U.S. We want the United States. We want the jobs here. We want to be able to dominate technology, the innovation life cycle, and the creation of those companies. I think just from a form of national security, that's important to us, and I think it's becoming much more important. And I subscribe to this rising tide raises all ships kind of a philosophy that, I do like the diversification of other areas of the country. And if I just could hone it in for a moment on Southern California, I was on a call the other day with the city of Irvine, and the city of Irvine is looking at everything being Irvine centric. And the way we've approached Orange County and what Octane does is to look at it as being Southern California. And if we can reap the resources of Los Angeles and San Diego, it elevates Orange County disproportionately. And if Orange County is disproportionately elevated, Irvine's going to be the benefactor of that. So these things all go in a cycle. And sometimes we look at things in too small a silo, and we just worry about our own four walls versus the things around us. So I love this. Let's lift the United States and keep things here. And that's going to have a dramatic impact on all the innovation centers that we talked about.
Andrew, you want to get the last word?
Yeah, I think, what do I make of the recent announcements? They're sending positive signals, I think, to the country that the Midwest is ready and willing and able to do its part for kind of the next generation economy. And, since we were stood up, collectively, we've invested over $1 billion in economic development projects, but the total investment from the private companies is like 60 billion. So 60 to 1. So the credit really, we're here to support, and we're here to help facilitate with the different state entities and local entities, but credit to the companies for making these investments. And I think, early signs are that they'll be successful.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for being part of the Feudal Future podcast. We appreciate your opinions. This is a very interesting conversation and look forward to continuing it.